We spend a lot of time analyzing the complex logistics of global shipping and the millions of seafarers who keep it moving. But once a commercial vessel reaches the absolute end of its operational life, it meets a workforce that operates entirely out of sight. Every vessel born in the pristine, highly engineered East Asian dry docks is destined for a much darker conclusion. Instead of mechanized recycling facilities, the overwhelming majority end up driven at full speed into the heavy tidal mud of South Asia. The International Labor Organization officially classifies the manual dismantling of these ships in developing nations as one of the most dangerous occupations in the world. The fatality rates consistently outpace modern mining, heavy construction, or deep-sea fishing. Behind this makeshift worker housing, thousands of men step out onto the tidal flats wielding gravity and fire as crude industrial tools to tear apart thousands of tons of steel. The entire life cycle of the global commercial fleet relies on a quiet necessity. The production of tomorrow's ships relies on these forgotten men risking their lives to dispose of the old ones. The men holding the cutting torches on the beaches of Alang and Chittagong are rarely local to the coast. They are almost exclusively internal migrants, traveling hundreds or thousands of kilometers from deeply impoverished, landlocked inland provinces. In Bangladesh, a staggering percentage of this temporary workforce shares a specific, tragic classification. They are active climate refugees. Rising sea levels, severe flooding, and increasing soil salinization have steadily erased their ancestral farming lands in the southern delta regions. Stripped of their agricultural livelihood, they are pushed toward the extreme hazards of the shipbreaking yards. It is one of the few places that offers a guaranteed cash income, keeping them clustered in sprawling temporary colonies outside the yard gates just to survive. When we watch a massive hull being sliced apart in the mud, we are looking at the exact point where global poverty meets climate displacement. These laborers act as human shock absorbers, taking on the environmental and economic pressures of the industrialized world. To manually deconstruct a commercial vessel, laborers rely heavily on the oxy-acetylene torch. This highly pressurized gas tool generates a localized flame, burning at over 3,000 degrees Celsius, which is used to slice through structural plates exceeding an inch in thickness. This schematic illustrates a complex hidden engineering hazard. After decades of fighting ocean waves, a ship's hull accumulates massive amounts of stored elastic energy, heavily concentrated along the longitudinal support beams. When a worker's torch severs one of these highly stressed sections, that immense tension is rapidly released. The steel snaps back violently. This explosive structural recoil can strike with forces exceeding a severe car crash, crushing anything in its immediate path. To bring the towering upper sections down, the crews strategically weaken massive 50-ton blocks of the ship's superstructure. They let gravity do the rest of the work as the steel plummets 5 stories directly into the wet mud below. Shipbreaking involves the highly volatile unraveling of immense physical forces that were tightly bound together in a shipyard decades ago. Beyond the kinetic sweat of falling steel, the atmosphere inside these decaying ships poses a severe chronic danger. Vessels built before the early 2000s are heavily laced with legacy toxins, particularly the thick asbestos lagging used to insulate engine room pipes. When workers tear down this dry, brittle insulation, microscopic asbestos fibers flood the confined air. Inhaling this dust leads directly to fatal respiratory diseases like mesothelioma, which often remain hidden for decades before striking the worker long after he has left the yard. The cutting process itself creates its own toxic byproduct. When an oxy-acetylene flame burns through older marine coatings, it vaporizes heavy metals like lead and cadmium. Inhaling these fumes causes metal fume fever, leading to neurological damage and chronic lung failure. The physical risks are extreme, yet the compensation is remarkably low. A highly skilled gas cutter in South Asia manually tears down a steel asset worth millions of dollars in cash to the yard owner. For a grueling 12-hour shift, that worker earns the equivalent of just $5 to $8. Because many laborers operate under a complex piece rate system, their income is directly tied to their daily output. Taking the time to properly ventilate a toxic space or fully secure a heavy load slows them down, directly reducing the pay they need to survive. Local authorities increasingly mandate personal protective equipment, but heavy fire retardant suits and thick respirators significantly restrict a worker's mobility and trap the extreme South Asian heat, making a long shift nearly unbearable. Forced to choose between the physical agility needed to dodge falling steel and the cumbersome gear meant to protect their lungs, workers frequently discard the safety equipment. The uncompromising economics of the beach dictate that they trade their long-term health for the daily speed required to meet their quotas. The grim conditions on these shorelines are finally facing heavy geopolitical resistance. Global trade unions and international NGOs have campaigned relentlessly, applying intense pressure to major shipping companies to reform the way they dispose of their fleets. That international pressure is forcing structural changes in key recycling hubs like Alang. The Indian government established a dedicated safety training institute, successfully training over 100,000 migrant workers in basic hazard awareness. Before these men are allowed onto a vessel, they are now taught how to correctly identify asbestos, safely operate high-pressure gas equipment, and execute emergency evacuation protocols. Yard owners realize to win lucrative demolition contracts from responsible ship owners, they must meet international standards. They have been forced to invest heavily in modern medical clinics, specialized hazardous waste containment facilities, and improved worker housing. The push for safety on the beaches is an ongoing war of attrition. It is a slow effort to drag a deadly, informal labor sector into the highly regulated light of modern maritime standards. Despite this progress, a massive compliance gap persists worldwide. In many coastal regions, entrenched informal labor practices and environmental degradation stubbornly resist modernization. Yet, as we look past the harsh environment and the raw physical danger, we simply have to recognize the profound debt that the globalized world owes to the men working in the mud. These isolated migrant laborers manually recover millions of tons of steel, preventing it from rusting away in forgotten anchorages, and returning it to the global supply chain for recycling.